Assalamu alaikum. Masā al-khair, good evening. The philosopher and poet George Santayana once said, "To know your future, you must know your past." And here in the region, we use اللي ما له أول ما له تالي. So, have you ever walked into a building that felt ancient but at the same time was very modern? It like was speaking to your imagination and also your past. This is the kind of experience our speaker is going to take us to tonight. I'm happy to introduce Waleed Arafa. He's an Egyptian architect and founder of Dar Arafa Architecture. He has a degree from Ain Shams University in Cairo and AA in London. His work spans Egypt, France, Bahrain, and the UAE. He was nominated, was two, but recently three, Aga Khan Award, and he won over 20 international architecture honors, mashallah. His current thesis is, and I hope I'm going to say it correctly, Zero Conjecture Documenting the Design Intent and Process of Basuna Mosque. Tonight, he'll share his search for a future of architecture. Please join me in welcoming Waleed Arafa.
Thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum. And thank you for this lovely introduction. Thank you for having me here. I'm going to try and not be too much of a bore, but I will have to share my plan for the talk today. It's going to be a little bit theoretical at the beginning, and then the second half will be about my attempt to apply the theoretical base that I will share with you. So, this lecture is based on my research and practice, primarily dedicated to exploring an alternative interpretation of tradition, to inform new possibilities for expanding architectural theory and practice, especially with regards to the much debated term Islamic architecture. But what is tradition and what is Islamic architecture? Is tradition relevant at all when we think of any possible future of architecture? What are the intellectual sources for the creative processes accepted as Islamic? A fresh outlook is in demand. Attempting to find answers to the questions above may have the potential of giving current generations of architects an original theoretical base to extend their past into a future different from and hopefully more successful than our present. The benefits of such attempts should not be limited within the so-called Muslim world. They may also offer the world fresh alternative outlooks, helping humanity out of its current gridlocks. So, what is the architectural theory today, or the framework for it? It owes its different strands and positions to Enlightenment. The Encyclopedia Britannica defines Enlightenment as follows: a European intellectual movement of the 17th and 18th centuries in which ideas concerning God, reason, nature, and humanity were synthesized into a worldview that gained wide assent in the West, and that instigated revolutionary developments in art, philosophy, and politics. Central to Enlightenment thought were the use and celebration of reason, the power by which humans understand the universe and improve their own condition. The goals of rational humanity were considered to be knowledge, freedom, and happiness. It is important to emphasize the strictly European context in which these theories emerged and thrived. Even theories that emerged geographically outside of Europe came to exist within the bounds of Western hegemony, be it in further propagating it or in being a reaction to it. These strands may differ and oppose one another, however, they all share the following convictions. Number one, the denial of metaphysics as a source of knowledge, or God is dead, as we see here. Or, secondly, the reduction of human existence and experience to only the physical and psychological in a complete denial of the spiritual dimension. The inevitability of dichotomy and constant clash. Function follows form, form follows function, less is more, less is a bore, absolute universalism versus absolute relativism. The myth of linear progress. Any chronologically advanced point on the timeline holds more value and credibility than the points preceding it. Thus, the past becomes by definition darker and holds no promise. So, why do we need alternatives? The very structure of existence is based on diversity. Diverse environments, worldviews, social structures, spiritual convictions, priorities, experiences, and histories all defy a singular premise for theory and application. This is not a discussion whether there is one truth or many truths. It is simply stating that as long as different perceptions and worldviews exist, diverse theory and application will naturally emerge from such diversity. Many proponents of Western intellectual hegemony and superiority argue that those who refuse to succumb to a singular theory, namely modernism, are those who fail to embrace it. I believe that this is completely untrue. Japan has not only embraced modernism and postmodernism, Japan has championed it, and very early on. Nevertheless, we will find that many Japanese intellectuals think that this was the wrong choice despite of their glaring success in representing it. Case in point, Junichiro Tanizaki with his statements. But also America. Even America, with its overwhelmingly population of European settlers, a nation established on the principles of enlightenment, still felt the need to respond to its different formative conditions. The fact that a single living condition changed, that which is geography, necessitated that this group of Europeans distinguish themselves from their direct ancestors, politically, economically, culturally, and down to the very musical notes. First, there was the brash young man fresh from his studies in Paris. His teacher, Nadia Boulanger, charged him to truly establish an American style of concert music, as written by Leonard Slatkin. This is an allusion to Aaron Copland, America's first classical composer. His French teacher refused to subject him and his colleagues to the singular European view, despite the fact that Copland and his colleagues studied with her in Paris. Boulanger believed in diversity and encouraged Copland to explore and find a different soundscape that truly comes from the very unique moment in time and space that is America. I believe time has proven her right, because Copland was praised for his uniquely American music that reflects the very soul and experience of our people. Also, again, Leonard Slatkin. The world needs alternatives not only to facilitate the emergence of multiple worldviews, it also needs alternatives so that the very existing approaches and worldviews do not become extinct. An unchallenged theory or worldview will soon become a dogma. Dogma begets coercion, conflict, endless horrors, and is ultimately civilizational suicide. Alternatives are the antidote to dogmatism and the consequent destruction of life. But what is tradition? Islam is centered, and I'm here speaking about the Islamic tradition or the tradition of Islam, is centered around divine revelation, the Holy Quran and the Noble Sunnah. In that sense, Islam is to be understood as absolute truth. However, this is by no means suggesting that Muslims should be passively inactive before a set of divine absolutes. There is a difference between Islam as an absolute truth and our understanding of it. Islamic thought, the former is what the former is what the French philosopher René Guénon alludes to in this statement. Indeed, true metaphysics is none other than the complete synthesis of certain and immutable knowledge, which stands apart from and transcends everything contingent and variable. Consequently, we cannot consider metaphysical truth to be anything other than axiomatic in its principles and theorematic in its deductions, and therefore just as rigorous as mathematical truth, of which it is the unlimited prolongation. Islamic thought, on the other hand, cannot be considered absolute by any means. We are limited beings, for our faculties are relative in their reach, strength, and accuracy. We operate in a relative level of existence, and hence our understanding or knowledge of anything can only be relative as well. This holds true even if that which we try to comprehend is absolute in and of itself. Our activities and endeavors are essentially manifestations of our understanding and knowledge, and thus they can only be relative themselves. What do we mean by tradition? And what are the sources of tradition? And what do we hope to achieve from engaging tradition? Tradition must be considered as a paradigm, a syntagma, methodology, and process, not as a final product or circumstantial solution. This means that we cannot consider a particular tangible architectural product traditional in and of itself, just because it was used successfully in the past. A dome, a mashrabiyya, or the use of Arabic inscriptions. The criteria for evaluating how traditional something is should be based on whether a given tangible architectural element or thought is in harmony with the same immutable principles essential to these previous tangible traditional elements, even if the elements under evaluation are complete innovations, unseen and unheard of in the annals of the history of Islamic architecture. Tradition at any given moment is composed of two main components, that is, in my opinion, of course, the absolute immutable and the relative mutable. The latter must be logically accurate deductions of the former. Tradition, in its true sense, capable of offering us a continuous future of architecture, must always be able to discern between these two components. The discernment is essential so that the right type of effort could be applied to each one of them. The effort applied to the absolute immutable should not be towards replacing it, rather, further understanding it, closing the gap between its higher reality and our own relative understanding of it, whereas the effort that should be applied to the relative mutable is in identifying the differences between diverse applications of the immutable principles within the ever-changing mutable relative moments of time and space. For example, safety is an absolute immutable principle with regards to the question of shelter, be it ancient or contemporary, at any given location or space. It transcends time and space in and of itself. However, the means by which this absolute immutable relative moments of time and space is in itself relative and mutable. A fire pit situated in the entrance of a cave suffices the caveman in terms of safety, because the threat to safety is likely to be a wild animal. The contemporary urban fellow attains the same sense of safety, albeit by means of more complex and intrusive high-tech solutions, such as CCTV or the state-of-the-art panic room. This necessary discernment is attainable through the ongoing process of abstraction. Islamic scholarship refers to this process as raf' al-mushakhisat, obtaining something from the source by disregarding al-ashkhas, actual persons, al-ahwal, states of being, az-zaman, time, and al-makan, place. This discernment is the main reason why the very same immutable Islamic principles were successful in producing endless versions of Islamic architecture from China in the east to Spain in the west, and from Russia in the north to Ghana in the south, over more than 10 centuries. This is how diversity within unity was seamlessly and consistently achieved. Islamic art embraces a whole range of styles, each of which is clearly distinguishable and corresponds to a specific ethnic environment, although no specific style could be described as being more or less Islamic than the other. This is an example of the phenomenon of diversity in unity, or a unity in diversity, and proves indirectly that Islam is not a synthesis invented by man. This is a quotation by Titus Burkhardt. Tradition, at least, a living tradition, is not a stagnant, static body of knowledge. Tradition is the accumulative human output of the Muslim mind through time. It is constantly growing. The more time progresses, the more knowledge and experience is added and accumulated to a dynamically ever-growing tradition. This entails that our understanding of tradition must not be stagnant, static, reductive, or selectivist. The process of tradition is not concerned with being. It is an absolutely dynamic process of perpetual becoming. The emergence of previously unknown documentary evidence, archaeological excavations, as well as new tools and methods of analysis are major contributors to this dynamicity. The careful examination, modification, and correction of past assumptions and analyses, once considered fully accurate, is another source for this becoming and further perfecting it. So, what are the sources of tradition? I classify my answer into two categories, main categories. The first being the immutable sources rooted in divine revelation, in Islam being the Quran and the Noble Sunnah, the prophetic traditions, including their very system of hermeneutics embedded within them, practiced in an exemplary and standardizing manner by the Prophet himself and passed down to his companions, who in their turn passed it on to the generations after them in what is known as al-Isnad al-Muttasil, or the unbroken chain of transmission. The second sources, or the second category of sources, are the mutable sources, the refined and accepted through al-ijma', scholarly consensus, human interpretations and applications of the scholarly qualified adherents of this divine revelation in every realm of expertise. But what do we hope to achieve from engaging tradition? The ultimate goal of the Islamic project, that's a quotation by an Azhari scholar, Usama al-Azhari, the ultimate goal of the Islamic project is to produce epistemological and universal services and applications capable of creating institutions and civilization that truly manifest the spirit of the maqasid al-Sharia, objectives of the sacred law, namely the preservation of life, intellect, lineage, religion, and wealth, upholding sustainable development, respecting humanity, the reverence of foundation of morality, being open to the global community in a mutually beneficial manner, highlighting the value of childhood, the value of women, protecting the environment as well as its inhabitants, including humans, animals, plants, and even inanimate things, all interwoven with a divine common thread, leading humanity back to their Lord. This could be summed up in the concept of istikhlaf. So a lot of people can say that this is just, theoretical stuff, but I mean, we have examples in this photo, for instance, how as architects we're bothered by birds, for instance, that in London, where I lived for 10 years, they call them the flying rats because of their droppings and how negatively they affect buildings. And this is how they counter this. Now, there are more humane solutions where there's falconers, say, for instance, in King's Cross Station. But the Muslim civilization produced the bird palaces, because it comes from a philosophy where we and the pigeons or any other creature need to coexist. Also, we have this very sad reality, which shows the priorities of architecture practiced within different traditions. The necessity of tradition. In a nutshell, the necessity of tradition is the necessity for upholding diversity and resisting collective amnesia in order to march forward into a future rather than having to be coerced into one. Otherwise, a diverse world with diverse problems, resources, and priorities will have to put up with a single solution, which will certainly not be adequate enough. The necessity for tradition and/or other worldviews outside the bounds of Western hegemony is avoiding the famous blunder of the fox and the crane, as told by Aesop in his fables. But what are the current interpretations of tradition in the architecture of the Muslim world as I understand them? You don't have to share my views. I see them as three categories: the Belle Epoque historicism, that was described by Khaled Asfour, the former professor at the MIT. They decompose traditional architecture into elements, either at the level of facades or plan types, and then copy these in their new design. The process of copying can be literal or may involve a slight transformation of the model from which it is derived. We can call this process visual abstraction. Abdelwahid al-Wakil masters this approach, according to Asfour. In my humble opinion, this approach is problematic in many senses, yet it is not without merit. The careful study of historical elements and their application in design and construction helps the preservation of certain crafts and skills that could be useful today and tomorrow, although they were forgotten yesterday. The main problem of this approach is that sooner or later, theory and practice will need new answers for new situations that are not readily available in this frozen legacy. The focus on the tangible materiality, the focus on tangible materiality or the final products leaves this approach with little ability to innovate when it is a must to do so, to face up to questions of new environments, new economic necessities, and sensibilities. It becomes a self imposed march towards irrelevance, narrowness, and most dangerously, archaicness. The second approach is Islamizing the isms. The proponents of this approach succumb for concepts, thought processes, and final products that are fully detached from tradition. They have accepted Western hegemony despite of their own delusion that they are resisting it. Thus, they import turnkey solutions, conceptualized and materialized in the West, and Islamize it. Barbie, the toy doll, is Western. She is always in a bikini or skimpy clothing, which is also not entirely Western, but I mean a certain type. Let us Islamize her by giving her an Oriental name, Fulla, and throw a black traditional dress on her. Now she has become Islamicized. Mission accomplished. This approach uncritically accepts any popular ism at any given moment and dresses it up with superficial elements from a frozen tradition, combining categorically irreconcilable concepts together by simplistically applying visual signifiers of one onto the other is but a distortion and abuse of both. The third approach, embracing the isms, the approach is established on the premise of the complete rejection of tradition and full immersion in the discourse of modernism and or postmodernism. So Nasser Rabat, that we were discussing this morning, uh, says the Orientalist influence, the influence of religious zealotry, and the influence of chauvinistic racism, as well as the self loathing critical influence resulting from the series of defeats and regressions experienced by the concept of Arab identity, and I can say the Islamic identity as well. All of this has infiltrated our own education, self image, and definition of our identity with a distorted final outcome. So, what is the alternative approach as I suggested? I speak of three stances towards tradition: conscious imitation, reimagining past solutions and elements in unprecedented ways, and tradition as methodology and not as final products. And in this part, I will be discussing an actual attempt that was designed and constructed by myself in Upper Egypt, in the south, 500 kilometers from Cairo, the town of Basuna. So this is where it's located. Cairo is obviously here before the delta, and this is Basuna on the Nile. This is a closer look. It's west of the Nile. And there were, in 2014, I was asked by an Azhari scholar, Sheikh Hussam al-Azhari, who's now become the Minister of Awqaf in Egypt, or religious endowments, to look at this building, which was a mosque that was built on top of an earlier version, 70 years earlier, that had suffered from structural problems, and the people wanted to do away with it completely and rebuild it. But he asked me first whether to check whether this is something that would better be conserved rather than redesigned. So I flew in and I looked at the mosque. I put up a report, and in conservation, obviously, we're looking for significance, which is a sum total of values. Some of them could be tangible, some of them are intangible. And my findings were that there are none. Actually, my analysis was that this was a moment where the public building of the village had embraced a new approach to architecture that divorces itself from everything that happened before because of imitation of what was going on in Cairo and Alexandria, which didn't fit the place. But then there were also points that cannot be debated, like when we look at the land here, we have the main road, which is 8 meters wide, very narrow, and we have another secondary road that leads to what we call al-Rahaba or Rahaba, which is a cul-de-sac surrounded by buildings that belong to one family. So it's a semi-private space where women and children from all the village are welcome, but the men are only welcome by invitation. This is the plot, and then the cemetery, and this is the plot for the mosque. But the old mosque was this area, and then this orange space was an extension, and here was a random parking area. You're going to see this in the photos now. So this is what it looked like. So the white building was the prayer hall, and then this was the bathrooms. These windows have toilets underneath them, you can imagine. And then there was this landmark tree, which a different vendor every day comes and sells different things. So it was an important feature. These are the bathrooms. And you had to go through them to go into the building. This is the extension that was painted in orange. There was the structural condition was not very safe because we had this crack here because of the building, this new building that happened next to it. The roof was made of mud and palm reeds. And there was Sohag is a very dry place, but every 10 years there's a flash flood that broke the ceiling as well. So this was the state of the old building. Architectural disrepair, as we can see in the other photos. And so, of course, there's always the danger when an architect interferes in a place that they impose their own ideas on the place. One step to avoid this is by understanding the history of the architecture of the village. There were different periods where, for instance, you had mud houses done in a certain way that responded to a certain way of life. And then you had the introduction of, say, more modern buildings with elements like balconies, for instance, that are never used. It's just an imitation for the sake of proving social mobility. But in Upper Egypt, it's an offense to stand in one of these balconies you'd be offending your neighbor. So you can start seeing that things that were practical, that were original to the place, were replaced by other things that didn't work in terms of materiality, in terms of aesthetic. They're just borrowed. And then you can find an older generation of buildings where things are done much more simpler, but with integrity, with an intent for beauty as well, an understanding of the local materials, an understanding of the street design, and how does a private building interact with the network of roads in the village, and what does it owe to the larger community. Um, Here, for instance, you can see that they were using two types of mud brick to create a certain aesthetic. Very simple, but there is an intent for beauty and design. These windows, they're very tall. Usually they close the ones below and open the one above to invite cool breeze, but while protecting their privacy. Entrances like this. And so my deduction was that the mosque was one of the earliest buildings 70 years ago that where people started looking outside of the village for things that were copies out of copies out of copies. Whereas detail like this in a 300-year-old building was an anchor. This is a turning a corner detail. And this is all just mud, but there's proportion, there's an incredible understanding of architecture. And I decided, okay, I'm going to start from this detail. At the same time, I was doing my thesis at the AA, and it was about the mosque in Britain. And I was asking if it were British heritage, because I think this is a condition for the mosqueness of a mosque. So this research helped. And generally, for the past 10 years, I was with the authors, Ahmed Mustafa and Stefan Sperl, in the studio of Ahmed Mustafa Fanoon in the UK, who was deciphering the theory of proportion script established by Ibn Muqla and documented by Ibn al-Bawab, uh, uh, where he's talking about how these letter shapes have come to being. So 10 years of being in the midst of this happening and sharing sometimes in a limited manner in the research of the book. This is Ahmed Mustafa. And this is the Azhari scholar who is the patron of the Basuna Mosque, because the land is his grandfather's. And that's myself. Didn't change much. And then, of course, being in the studio of Dr. Ahmed and being exposed to something like the cube of cubes, which is, it requires a lot of time to explain, but I mean, being around all of this is an organic source. I mean, being in the midst of all of this started giving me ideas before I was commissioned the mosque, because it gave me questions before it gave me ideas. You can see that this was a paper out of my notes while I was watching Meeting with Remarkable Men, the famous movie with Peter Brook in it, in 2009. I was commissioned the mosque in 2014. But I was thinking these questions. I was watching this movie with Dr. Ahmed Mustafa himself, and so I'm saying that whatever practical solution, whatever physical manifestations come from a worldview. Now the practical steps of manifesting this theory into a physical space. So this is the land again, as I said. This is the main road, 8 meters, which means heavy machinery cannot go inside. And I cannot stress enough the importance of practicing and building for an architect, because you cannot draw or design beautiful things that you don't know how they're going to work. Constructability has to be, and materiality, structural systems have to be part and parcel from your thought process. For instance, the challenges, as I said, was constructability, but also we're creating a space that needs to help you to be introspective, to disconnect from the horizontal plane. I mean, all the noises outside the mosque, the tuk-tuks, the cattle passing by, the dust, the bad smells, all of these things that will keep your five senses busy when you need to actually elevate beyond this realm of existence. So, but at the same time, we need natural ventilation, we need natural lighting, and we'll see how this was solved. So, the strategy was to create the walls as a very thick skin with minimal openings. So, an entrance from here, from the main road, a bent entrance. And then the entrance from the back is direct, but it's open on a more peaceful space, which I described before as a rahaba. The qibla is in this direction, and then this is the cemetery. There's only one window on this wall here, but it's overlooking a very peaceful part, which is the cemetery. Nobody's moving there, with a symbolic message I will explain later. And then the entire natural ventilation and lighting comes from above for a mechanical reason and a symbolic reason that I'll go furthermore into detail. So this is the I did multi-purpose hall at the lower ground level, and then which could be used as different things, because again, if we're talking about our biggest problem in architecture today is sustainability, and when you allocate incredible sources for a building, then that is used only for prayer, which goes against the idea of what a mosque is. So a couple of hours out of every 24 hours, and this doesn't work. And the early mosque, the Mosque of the Prophet, was used for everything. Even sometimes I say, and some people don't like that, for entertainment, but we do know, we do have evidence that this happened. So there are two entrances, and then the multi-purpose hall could be furnished in different ways for different activities to keep the building useful around the clock. This is the main plan with, as I said, with an entrance from the back and the main entrance from the front. And then a mezzanine that is exclusive for women. Women can go on all three levels. So these are sketches that show, because the problem of the mosque also is that when it's peak time, you need a lot of space for worshippers, say on Friday prayers and during Ramadan, but else otherwise you don't need that much space for prayers, say for the 5 prayers a day. And so I needed the space, but then the lower ground floor could be used in different things, festivities, for tuition, for medical services that lack in the village. And these are not all titles that are claimed. They need to be embedded within the architectural solution. So entrances, so an entrance from here, an entrance from there, a possibility to separate the space in with different scenarios, and also solving all the lighting and all of that. So that's why we call it a multi-purpose hall. It could be used in different spatial configurations. Now, this is the original facade, because you will notice later on in the completed photos of the project that this part is missing, but this was due to budgetary problems. Of course, we have to study the sun, we have to study the wind. Let's remember we are in an economically limited village, so we have to keep everything low tech, low maintenance. Also, in the rare occasion of flash floods, what to do with this water, how to probably utilize it. And then the construction process, and this is where I come back, tie into my theoretical base, where I say that tradition as a gateway to a future of architecture depends on three stances. Conscious imitation, that is number one, and my example for that is the entrance dome. So this is the Grand Mosque of Cordoba in Spain, and if we look at this dome here, which is made of intersecting arches, semicircular. I'm sure everybody's familiar with it. Which was also again used by the late Abdul Halim Ibrahim, an Egyptian architect, in the entrance for the American University in Cairo, which really made me think, why did he choose this for an entrance and he didn't complete it? And I think he was trying to give a message that we have to look into the past and in a certain way to go into the future. And so this is what I did in my entrance dome over the bent entrance, but also because like it's never one reason if you're after something genuine, because if you're walking on the street in Upper Egypt, just like here, the sun is so strong, you're going to go under a roof, and if you go just suddenly, your eyes are going to hurt. You need something that will regulate. So this was reinterpreted. I mean, there's here using technology. These are pieces of glass, so it allows some light, but not as much as what is on the street, and it prepares you for what is coming next. At the same time, it's very fast at building it. One man can do these arches, 2 days maximum. The whole thing took less than a week. We can see the steps, very cheap, and also it's very honest. Anybody can go into the mosque after the construction process and understand how is this made. So these were the steps, and we go back to the finished product. So you go under this, and then you go underneath the main roof in the main prayer hall. Also, another example of this is the woodwork. In Upper Egypt, there's, like most of our Arab region, we have incredible variations in temperature between day and night and between seasons, and that is the biggest enemy of any woodwork. But when we look around, especially at Mamluk mosques, we find al-Jam'iyya al-Kamila, or the joinery without any steel bits, that have survived hundreds of years with huge doors. And so, if this solution, conscious imitation, if there's a traditional solution that was there, or a solution from the past that still is valid today, there's nothing wrong with using it. We should not replace it just for the sake of innovation. And this is what happened here. This is the whole process. I did this with a workshop in Cairo for the doors and everything. No nails, nothing. And you can see the scale of the door, and it still stands in a very good condition. The project was completed in 2018, and this is it after it was finished. The second stance is reimagining past solutions and elements in an unprecedented way. And my example for applying this was the solution for the roof. The pendentive dome was never an independent element in architecture. It's a transitional element to transform a square plan into an octagon and then a circle to create a dome. But here it was reimagined as an independent element to cover the roof of the building, because again, as I said, this roof is big. If we're not going to, it has to be done with manual labor. It has to be thermally efficient, and it has to be cheap. But also, because I don't want to open windows on the exterior of the mosque, this is where I get better air with less pollution, with less dust, with less noise, with less smells, and indirect natural light. And as you can see, just one man, or actually two, because there's his helper as well, can do this in no time. So the whole roof was divided into 108 squares, and then a main one for the main dome, and then covered with these pendentive domes that would protect the rest. I mean, the square would be divided into two triangles. One is opaque because it's covered with the pendentive dome, and the other is made of glass to allow indirect light. So it works as a sunroof and a wind catcher at the same time. This is how it looks like from the inside before it was finished. And then you have vertical pieces of glass with openings that are directed towards the northwest, which is the direction of cool breeze in Egypt. And this is the scale you can imagine. It's 180 by 180 centimeters. And then the third stance is tradition as methodology, not final products, where we are understanding how people thought in the past and the immutable bits of it, but entering new input, resulting into new solutions. And my attempt in this direction was the central dome. These are computer graphic images, but you'll see the real ones. So these are very light blocks produced locally. We can imagine a cubic meter of brick, standard brick, is about 1.5 to 1.7 tons per cubic meter. This is 0.45 or 450 kilograms per cubic meters, and that helped us use less steel. You could see in the beams in the previous pictures that they are very small in their drop, so we used minimal concrete. But then also the idea of harmonizing with nature, because a building, no matter how beautiful it is it doesn't move from its place, and but the world moves, the universe moves, especially the movement of the sun or the earth around the sun, and that can animate something that is actually standing in place. And the idea of proportion, as I mentioned, the cosmic script, they're talking about the golden ratio and all of that. And hence this idea, which also creates a self-shading element, because these are protruding blocks on the outside and on the inside. Of course, this is not a usual. This is not the usual thickness for a dome. This is not a usual setting. So I had to come up with a device to utilize the knowledge of the craftsmen in a way that they haven't thought of before, and that's how we created this device, by which you can just place your block from a cutting list between two notches, between the red and orange rings, and that makes it very easy for them to place every block in its place. All of these are computer tests. And then we arrive here, computer as well. And then this is the reality after it was finished. And then also these blocks are not perforated. We had to perforate them to ensure their stability before during construction. This is the cutting list. So sometimes the difference between each course were millimeters. So people had to just sand as you can see, this gentleman here, to bring it to the right dimensions. Here it is as it's being constructed. This is the test of the compass, or the formwork, the movable. So it's 1/8 of the dome and it rotates. One man can push it. It was even heavy at this moment. We were testing and we made it faster and smoother. These are the notches after which you need to place the edge of each block. And this is it happening. And you can see the steps. This is the first, you have the square, and then a pendentive dome is happening to create an octagon, and then the circle, and merry goes round until you get to this result. And here you can see the three elements. So on the right hand side, or your right hand side, this is the CGI image, and this is a reality after it was completed. You can see how the sun goes in, and of course that area, that lit area, moves all the time around the seasons and around the day. And this is it after completion. The ladies' privacy wall again is something that is where we use an old concept, but we reinterpret it according to the input of our time. I'm not going to dwell upon it much, but the idea of any mashrabiyah is that the openings are small and closer to those who need to be protected, whose privacy needs to be protected, without blocking the sun and air. And there was a lot of resistance in the village to the women coming to the mosque, and so I had to respond with an element where that can make them more comfortable. So, because the staircase makes them obvious to everyone else in the village, so we had to create this screen. So you can call it a stone mashrabiyah if you like. The minaret, based on the concepts that create the alif according to Ibn Muqla, and these are pages from the book. And obviously, everybody knows that Ibn Muqla says it's the area, the alif is the area of 7 dots. So this explains it, that the area doesn't mean the configuration. It could be different configurations. And then the fact that the dot has to sit in minimally, the box of space around it has to be at least double the area, so it could be seen without distortion. That was one concept that created the minaret. And as we see here, so I simply drew a base, and then at the height of 7 dots, I created that twist, which gave us the minaret. And as you can see, the cube of cubes was supposed to sit on top here, but it didn't happen. And then also the cube of cubes, I don't want to bore you too much, but this is an artwork, as we can see it in this in its form here, by Dr. Ahmed Mustafa, and it was reimagined as a mihrab. It had to be turned in the other direction, which meant it's 750 kilograms, almost three quarters a ton, flying in the air, and we had to find a solution for that. To create the mihrab. There's so much symbolism there because this is the divine attributes of God. And when we are standing to pray, it's not just about doing something ritualistic, it's supposed to change something in you. It's a 5 times a day reminder to emulate God in his attributes. So he's the generous, you have to be generous. He's the merciful, you have to be merciful. This is your qibla, this is your orientation, your ethical orientation. These cubes were made of alabaster to allow for the backlighting, as we can see, and they have the divine names. And then this is the project I'll share with you. We're done after its completion. This is the mosque sitting in its fabric. Again, the entrance dome, the pendentive dome's roof, and then the central dome, the three main elements that represent the three stances that I was speaking about. You can see the orientation of the windows. Many people speak about different interpretations that I never thought about, but that's interesting. And the central dome, the back entrance, and the entrance for the ladies. The staircase leading down and up. The mezzanine. This window here, I mean, the leader of anybody who's leading a prayer usually says, pray as if it were your last prayer. And I mean, to help you be completely focused, this window, when we see the photos of the interior, is just across from the main entrance. And when you look through it, this is what you see. And so this is the statement without it being said. And that's why it's the only opening in the skin to the prayer hall. The wudu areas below. Here under the main, the entrance dome. Showing how the light moves. Thank you very much for your attention.